Welcome back to the channel where we expose grifters for who they really are. Today we have Ben Shapiro, the walking embodiment of privileged ignorance, explaining to the working class why they should work until they drop dead. And this isn't just bad policy, this is a masterclass in how trust fund babies use statistics to gaslight workers into accepting their own exploitation. We're about to witness 3 minutes of pure sociopathy wrapped in fast-talking pseudo-intellectualism. Let's dismantle this take piece by piece and expose exactly what Shapiro is really doing here.
And let's be real about this. It's insane that we haven't raised the retirement age in the United States. It's totally crazy. Joe Biden, if that were the case, Joe Biden should not be running for president. Hey, Joe Biden is 81 years old. The retirement age in the United States, at which you start to receive Social Security and you are eligible for Medicare, is 65. Joe Biden has technically been eligible for Social Security and Medicare for 16 years, and he wants to continue in office until he is 86, which is 19 years past when he would be eligible for retirement. No one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think retirement itself is a stupid idea unless you have some sort of health problem.
Ben Shapiro, a man whose most physically demanding work experience was probably carrying his Harvard law books, thinks retirement itself is stupid. This is coming from someone who makes millions of dollars sitting in air-conditioned studios, talking into microphones, and writing opinion pieces. Let me paint you a picture of what actual work looks like, Ben. Imagine spending 30 years on a construction site, your knees shot from kneeling on concrete, your back destroyed from lifting materials, your hands gnarled from operating heavy machinery in all weather conditions. Imagine being a nurse, spending decades on your feet for 12-hour shifts, lifting patients, dealing with bodily fluids, watching people die, carrying emotional trauma that accumulates over years. Imagine working in a factory, breathing in chemicals, operating dangerous machinery, doing repetitive motions that destroy your joints and tendons. But Shapiro thinks retirement is stupid unless you have some sort of health problem. Here's the reality check, then. After 30 years of actual physical labor, everyone has health problems. The human body isn't designed to do manual labor for 45 years straight. Only someone who has never done real work in his entire privileged life could make such a statement with a straight face. This is the fundamental disconnect between the donor class and working people. Shapiro genuinely cannot comprehend that work can be physically and mentally destructive because his version of work is essentially getting paid to have opinions. He's never had a job that left him too exhausted to play with his kids at the end of the day. He's never worked a job that made him dread Monday mornings or count down the minutes until 5 p.m.
Everybody that I know who is elderly, who has retired, is dead within 5 years.
This is classic right-wing logic. Identify a problem, then propose a solution that makes the problem worse while serving corporate interests. Shapiro has identified that our society does a terrible job of supporting elderly people, that we've created a culture where people's entire identity and social connections are tied to their employment, and that retirement can be isolating and purposeless. The obvious progressive solution would be to create better social support systems, community programs for retirees, healthcare that isn't tied to employment, and social structures that value elderly people for more than just their economic productivity. But that would require spending money on working people, and we can't have that. So instead, Shapiro's solution is to just force people to work until they die. Problem solved. No more difficult transition to retirement if there is no retirement. It's worth noting that Shapiro's social circle probably consists entirely of other wealthy people whose retirement looks very different from a factory worker's retirement. When rich people retire, they often maintain social connections, have expensive hobbies, travel, serve on boards, do consulting work, and generally remain engaged in meaningful activities. When working class people retire, they often face financial stress, social isolation, and health problems from decades of physical labor. But Shapiro can't make this distinction because he genuinely doesn't understand that different classes of people have different experiences.
And if you talk to people who are elderly and they lose their purpose in life by losing their job and they stop working, things go to hell in a handbasket real quick. But put all of that aside, just on a fiscal level and on a logical level. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt established 65 as the retirement age, the average life expectancy in the United States was 63 years old. Today, the average life expectancy in the United States is close to 80.
And here we get to witness Ben Shapiro's signature move, using statistics in the most misleading way possible to support a predetermined conclusion. In 1935, the average life expectancy was indeed around 63, but that number was heavily skewed by infant and child mortality rates. If you actually made it to age 21 in 1935, your life expectancy was much higher, closer to 70 or 75. And if you made it to 65, you could expect to live well into your 70s or even 80s. The Social Security system was never designed assuming that most people would die before collecting benefits. That's a right-wing myth. But even more importantly, Shapiro is completely ignoring what those extra years of life actually look like for working-class people. Yes, people are living longer, but are they living healthier? A construction worker who lives to 80 instead of 70 isn't getting 10 extra years of vitality, he's getting 10 extra years of chronic pain, joint problems, and the accumulated damage from decades of physical labor. Meanwhile, people in Shapiro's class, the professional managerial class and above, are indeed living longer and healthier lives. They have access to better healthcare, less physically demanding work, healthier food, safer neighborhoods, and less stress. So when Shapiro says, people are living longer, so they should work longer, he's projecting his class experience onto everyone else. This is the statistical sleight of hand that conservative intellectuals specialize in. Take a true but incomplete statistic, strip away all context and nuance, and use it to justify policies that serve elite interests while harming working people. It's propaganda masquerading as analysis.
It's totally insane that you believe that you should be able to work from the time that you are essentially 20 to the time that you are 65, which is a 45-year period, pay in, and then you will receive Social Security benefits sufficient to support you and your family, you and your wife or whatever, for like another 20 years. That's crazy talk. That is not fiscally sustainable.
This quote reveals so much about Shapiro's worldview that it's almost beautiful in its honesty. He genuinely believes that expecting a dignified retirement after 45 years of work is insane. Think about what he's actually saying here, that getting your entire adult life to the economic system shouldn't entitle you to a few years of rest and security at the end. 45 years of work. That's getting up at 5 a.m. for 45 years. That's dealing with bosses, workplace stress, commutes, and physical labor for 45 years. That's missing your kids' school plays because you had to work overtime for 45 years. That's watching your body slowly break down from repetitive motions and physical demands for 45 years. That's paying into a system through payroll taxes for 45 years. And Shapiro thinks it's crazy talk that this should entitle you to financial security in your final years. This is the mindset of someone who views working people as nothing more than production units. The idea that humans might deserve dignity, rest, and security after a lifetime of labor is incomprehensible to him. But here's what's really insidious about this argument. Shapiro is framing Social Security as some kind of welfare program that working people are getting for free. That's not how Social Security works. People pay into Social Security their entire working lives. It's their own money being returned to them with interest. It's not a handout. It's a forced savings program that ensures people have something to live on when they can no longer work. The reason Social Security is financially stressed isn't because people are living too long or because the program is too generous. It's because wages have been stagnant for decades while productivity has soared, meaning people are paying in less while the wealthy capture more of the economic gains. It's because the payroll tax cap means wealthy people like Shapiro pay a much smaller percentage of their income into Social Security than working people do. But addressing those root causes would require challenging the economic system that enriches people like Shapiro. Much easier to just blame working people for having the audacity to want a retirement.
The notion that if you have to raise the retirement age to 67 or 68, that everyone is going to fall apart. My parents are that age. My parents are not retired. And they shouldn't retire. It would be very bad for them to retire.
Let's think about what Shapiro's parents' situation probably looks like. They're wealthy, well-educated, have good healthcare, probably work in professional jobs that aren't physically demanding, have social connections outside of work, and most importantly, they have the choice of whether to keep working or retire. When you have financial security and work that doesn't destroy your body, continuing to work can indeed be fulfilling. But Shapiro can't imagine that other people's parents might be in completely different situations. He can't imagine parents who are exhausted, in chronic pain, financially stressed, and desperate to stop working but can't afford to. He can't imagine parents whose jobs are soul-crushing, whose bodies are breaking down, who dream of nothing more than a few years of peace and quiet before they die. This is the fundamental blindness of the privileged class. They assume their experience is universal and their values are shared by everyone. When Shapiro's parents choose to keep working, it's because work is fulfilling for them. When a factory worker keeps working at 70, it's because the system has failed to provide them with any other option. He's turned a personal preference of privileged people into a universal moral principle that should be imposed on everyone through policy.
By the way, it's disrespectful to people who are 67, 68, 69 years old to suggest that they are in the same shape as people who are 65 were in 1940. It's not true at all. Have you met a 65-year-old lately? 65-year-olds are not old in the United States. They're not. 68-year-olds are not old in the United States. Again, Joe Biden thinks he's not old, and that dude is running for president again, and that dude actually is old, and he's 81. I fail to see how a country in which our entire leadership class is 80 plus is telling you that we should have a retirement age of 65. It makes no sense at all.
This might be the most accidentally revealing thing Shapiro says in this entire rant. He's inadvertently admitting that America is run by a gerontocracy, elderly politicians who are completely disconnected from the experiences of working people. But instead of seeing this as a problem, he's using it to justify forcing working people to work longer. Yes, Ben, our leadership class is ancient. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, they're all well past traditional retirement age. But here's what Shapiro conveniently ignores. These people aren't doing physical labor. They're not lifting heavy objects, standing on their feet for 12 hours, or breathing in industrial chemicals. Political work is not physically destructive in the way that most working-class jobs are. More importantly, these elderly politicians have access to the best healthcare in the world, personal staff to handle their daily needs, and working conditions that most Americans can only dream of. Comparing Joe Biden's experience of being 81 to a construction worker's experience of being 81 is like comparing a luxury cruise to being lost at sea. But this reveals something deeper about Shapiro's worldview. He genuinely believes that our elderly leadership class and working people are comparable. He can't see the massive differences in their circumstances, their health, their working conditions, and their options. To him, work is work, and if rich old people can do it, then poor old people should be able to do it too. Shapiro has never experienced what it's like to have your body worn down by decades of physical labor, so he cannot comprehend why someone would need or want to retire. He's projecting the experience of the professional class onto the entire working population. What we just witnessed was 3 minutes of pure ideological violence disguised as reasonable policy discussion. Ben Shapiro has revealed himself to be exactly what his critics have always said he is, a privileged sociopath using his platform to advocate for policies that will cause immense suffering to working people while serving the interests of the donor class. Let's be crystal clear about what Shapiro is actually arguing for here. He wants to force people to work until they die, not because it's good for them, but because it's profitable for the ownership class. Every year that someone continues working past 65 is another year of labor extraction, another year of avoiding pension payments, another year of keeping wage costs down by preventing job turnover. Shapiro's entire argument is built on a foundation of class blindness so profound that it borders on mental illness. He genuinely cannot comprehend that different people have different experiences of work, different physical capacities, different financial situations, and different values. His narcissistic assumption that his family's situation is universal reveals a mind so warped by privilege that it has lost all connection to human reality. The statistical manipulation he employs is particularly disgusting because it's so obviously designed to mislead his audience. He takes a true fact, that life expectancy has increased, and strips away all the context that would complicate his argument. He doesn't mention that much of that increase is due to reduced infant mortality, not increased healthy lifespan for elderly people. He doesn't mention that life expectancy gains have been unevenly distributed, with working-class people seeing much smaller improvements than wealthy people. He doesn't mention that increased lifespan often means increased years of disability and chronic illness for people who've done physical labor their entire lives. This is how conservative intellectuals operate. They find statistics that can be twisted to support predetermined conclusions, then present their manipulation as objective analysis. It's propaganda with a Harvard degree. But the most revealing aspect of Shapiro's argument is his complete lack of empathy for human suffering. When he observes that retired people in his social circle die within 5 years, his response isn't compassion, it's a cold calculation that they should be forced to keep working instead. This is the mindset of someone who views other humans as economic units rather than people with inherent dignity and worth. Shapiro has never spent a day doing physically demanding work, never worried about paying rent, never had to choose between healthcare and groceries, never experienced what it's like to have your body slowly destroyed by decades of labor. Yet he has the audacity to tell working people that wanting to retire is stupid and insane. Shapiro is using his platform to normalize the idea that working people don't deserve dignity, security, or rest after a lifetime of labor. He's advocating for a return to 19th century working conditions where people worked until they died, all while presenting this as reasonable and necessary. The most infuriating part is that Shapiro will never experience the consequences of the policies he advocates. He'll never have to work a physically demanding job past age 65. He'll never have to choose between medication and rent on a Social Security income. He'll never know what it's like to have his body broken by decades of manual labor. He's advocating for suffering that will never touch him or anyone in his social class. This is why Ben Shapiro is so dangerous. He's not just wrong, he's wrong in a way that serves power and causes real harm to real people. His fast-talking, pseudo-intellectual style gives a veneer of respectability to arguments that are fundamentally cruel and dehumanizing. The fact that millions of people listen to Shapiro and nod along with these arguments shows just how successful the conservative propaganda machine has been at turning working people against their own interests. When a trust fund baby can convince construction workers that wanting to retire is stupid, the ideological capture is complete. Ben Shapiro represents everything wrong with conservative intellectualism: the class blindness, the statistical manipulation, the complete lack of empathy, and the willingness to cause suffering in service of abstract ideological principles. He's a sociopath with a podcast, and his retirement take proves it beyond any doubt. This is what happens when you give privileged narcissists platforms to influence public policy. They use their access to advocate for a world that serves their interests while imposing maximum suffering on everyone else. And they do it all while convincing themselves that they're being reasonable and logical. Ben Shapiro wants working people to die at their desks, and he wants them to thank him for the privilege.